G'day mate, 40 here. So I notice with the more higher IQ end of the news discussion section, you get a lot of people talk about how depressed they are by the success of talentless hacks. You hear about Richard finding it depressing that Nick Fuentes is so popular or that Tim Pool is so popular. And I'm trying to understand that mindset. Like, I've never gotten depressed by the success of talentless hacks. It's irrelevant to me. I don't believe that success is something that is parceled out according to merit, according to intelligence, according to goodness, according to clarity, according to righteousness. I was just kind of amusing. Why would anyone get depressed by the success of talentless hacks? Unless you're so incredibly self-absorbed that you believe all success in the world simply belongs to you. Or the other alternative is you're just completely disconnected from reality. And so you don't realize that success is not apportioned precisely on the basis of merit. So here's Richard Spencer and company.
He called me for fun. He's like, what do you know about him? I was like, well, I met him in 2016. He interviewed me. I actually talked to someone who was like, it's this weird mirror image that you're watching. And I think someone who's a journalist actually told me this in terms of Tim Pool. And it was like a light going off because I actually talked to this guy.
So the success of pundits like Richard Spencer or Tim Pool or Nick Fuentes or Luke Ford is not according to merit, not according to clarity, not according to righteousness, not according to depth and profundity. It's according to how well you meet the needs of your audience. Tim Pool meets the needs of his audience for excitement and drama. Richard Spencer meets the needs of his audience for excitement and drama. It's just Richard's audience is about 20 average IQ points higher than Tim Pool's. Richard's audience is about 20 IQ points higher than David Duke's or Nick Fuentes. But they're still meeting the needs of an audience. It has nothing to do with merit.
I did this huge takedown of Tim Pool, and for the New York Times actually, and I think he called me for fun. He's like, what do you know about him? I was like, well, I met him in 2016. He interviewed me a few times. I was like, I don't really have anything, but we kind of talked it out, and I don't know. He was kind of working on his thesis or something. I might have even helped him to agree. But he said something that the light went off in my head because I was like, it's so discouraging and just even depressing. The fact that this guy who is just fucking talentless, and he has no gift.
So why does Richard find that so depressing? It's never occurred to me to feel depressed by the success of Tim Pool. He's not someone that I turn to. But on occasion, he's done some good work. I played a few minutes of one of his videos recently that was pretty good. But he's not a talentless hack. He's very talented, very hardworking at meeting the needs of his audience. Now, when a hawker meets the needs of a client, all right, this is not necessarily something that's meritorious or righteous or holy or transcendent, right? It's meeting the needs of an audience. So sometimes business meets the needs of an audience, doing something that's good and meritorious, but there's no inherent connection between meeting the needs of your audience or being a business that dishes out goods and dishing out something that's righteous and good. Right? Plenty of businesses, make money, selling toxic product.
Gifts. He's on the intelligence scale, he's a 5. On the looks scale, he's a 5. On the charisma scale, he's maybe a 0.
Okay, Tim Pool is way above average in intelligence. He's got the ability to speak to the 100 IQ crowd, but he is not 100 IQ. He's probably in the 120s.
Any scale, there's just nothing there. Fuentes has a lot of charisma, and he's smart. On the kind of ideology scale or whatever, I think he's low. He doesn't get it, but he has. I understand why people want that. I can look at
Nick Fuentes doesn't get it. He gets what his audience wants to hear. He gets that very well. He gets it more effectively than any other pundit in his genre. And he gives it to them. He delivers. So, no, he doesn't have the philosophical depth of a PhD in philosophy or of a great intellectual. He's no Eric Hoffer, the longshoreman philosopher. But he is an entertainer and pundit who gives his audience what they want to hear.
Evangelist. And even if it disgusts me, I kind of understand why this guy, gets people to donate $100,000 every Sunday. Tim Pool, I'm just mystified. I'm like, how could you possibly want to listen to this person? And he said that's the secret to his success, because all of the guys, and it's mostly guys who are listening to him, they're just like him. They're wearing a t-shirt and a beanie cap, and they don't understand the world or the news, and they have bad opinions that are reinforced and affirmed by this idiot.
On top of that, he has like the aesthetics of a tech bro.
He does, yeah. And kind of, it's like a combination of a tech bro with a maybe kind of a working class little quality of that too. So, because he surely reaches more people outside of tech bros. But yeah, it's like some low-level coder or some guy who runs websites or probably a working class person. But he's a mirror reflection of who they are.
Oh my God, working class.
And so that's the secret. And that's the kind of like, we've moved away from an authority figure and we've moved to a mirror reflection in how we consume news. Because, he does meta-analysis. So he'll read news columns or stories on the air.
So Rich is disgusted that someone who's working class and not aristocratic is successful and has gained an enormous following. Right? This is success, money, and following that really Richard feels belongs to him.
Then he'll comment on them. But it's not like the people watching him are actually, like, they've read the New York Times or the HuffPost, and then they go to get his commentary on it. They're not getting the actual story. Like, they're getting the commentary, which is liberals are crazy, or whatever he's saying. And so you move from like Walter Cronkite or Tom Brokaw as the voice of God, or as the voice of your father, or your college professor maybe, or your high school principal. Is it some male, older, gray-haired?
Look, Walter Cronkite's show was aimed at an average audience with a 100 IQ. Like network shows are aimed at an average audience with an average IQ of 100. Tucker Carlson's show is probably aimed at an audience with an average IQ of 100 to 105. So it's not like Walter Cronkite was aiming at an audience with an incredibly more elevated IQ than Tim Pool.
Authority figure. And you move to a mirror reflection of yourself. And you don't even bother with the action.
Everyone's looking for a reflection of themselves. We're all looking to create a world around us that's most conducive to our thriving. Right? We all see the world not as it is, but as we are.
News, you just go right in for the, like, dumbass take. But that's a huge thing.
The dumb take is what a lot of people want to hear, right? People just want to hear that their side is awesome, right? So that's meeting a need. He's meeting his audience's needs.
Because more people listen to Tim Pool than certainly watch the nightly news by a factor of 1,000.
That's not true, right? Several million people watch, probably 10 million people watch the nightly news. That's a far bigger audience than what Tim Pool gets.
It's like a new concept from the internet.
Yeah. That is a depressing statistic.
I mean,
It's hugely depressing.
He's a perfect example of being like,
Why? Why is that depressing? Don't you know what 100 IQ people are like? What they want? You really expect 100 IQ people to seek out commentary that's aimed at a 125 IQ crowd? Like, how removed from reality, how delusional, how self-centered do you have to be to find any of this depressing? It's just reality.
like how you could be a talentless hack and still like make a decent chunk of change, quite frankly. Like, I'm sure he's probably monetized this channel quite extensively. So,
Oh yeah, he stays on YouTube. He does it every day. He does hours a day. He does live stream. I mean,
Yeah, he works hard. He meets his audience's needs. He produces material that people want to hear, and he's successful.
I mean, one problem that I have is I do get kind of, I won't say bored with things, but like, I need to be stimulated in some other way. Like I don't.
Yeah, smarter people, right, demand smarter entertainment, smarter commentary, or they get bored.
If I'm going to do a podcast, then I want to go and like do some editing or do some original writing, and then I want to go and like do something like this, which is free form, and I get to think through things, and then I want to, whatever. I mean, the idea of just doing the same crap like 5-7 days a week is just, yeesh.
Well, Richard could be producing a formidable intellectual body of work. Like, he could be producing books. If he's the intellectual that he thinks he is and says he is, if he's this serious thinker that he just self-describes, then why isn't he producing books and essays instead of tweets and podcasts?
You know who Dr. Laura is, Richard?
Dr. Lauren?
Dr. Laura, the radio woman from the 90s.
Yes, I do know her.
She's been doing the same exact. She's still on Sirius XM every day, and she's been doing the exact same format for like 40 years. I cannot imagine how she's not bored of that.
Yeah. Well, there's a certain type.
Well, Dr. Laura deals with, basic human problems that haven't changed that much in 40 years. So I think she's very good at what she does. She has a knack for cutting to the moral core of an issue. So yeah, there's an evergreen demand for what Dr. Laura has to say, similar with the Dennis Prager.
And, I'm not that type.
Yeah.
If I was in corporate America, I would be.
So yeah, people like Richard and people like myself, we're not content to hoe the same row, right? We're always have to be after new intellectual adventures. We're intellectual gigolos. We're falling in love with every beautiful idea that comes along, but ultimately stay loyal to none.
Like quitting my job, starting companies, and moving on, and whatever. That's just kind of how I am.
Be on Shark Tank.
Yeah, I'd be on Shark Tank.
Shark Tank.
But I don't know. I don't know. Is there any more in this that we need to squeeze out?
I have one disgusting comment, and that is
Sure.
that in the same way that pornography has been remonetized through OnlyFans, I think the news has been as well, because I think what happens with OnlyFans is that it offers a lot of men, this bullshit parasocial connection between content producers and themselves.
Why is it BS? Like, why is it any more BS than all sorts of other transactional relationships? Like, we all want to feel connected. We all want to feel alive. We all want to feel like we're living from the inside. We all want to feel strong and bonded. And for some people, they're so dysfunctional, or their life is turned in such a sad direction that they don't have access to normal human bonds. And so people turn for connection where they can get it. So some people turn to drugs and alcohol and all sorts of online entertainments. But there's no way of living without connection. We're wired to connect. If you don't connect in a healthy way, you'll connect in dysfunctional ways. But for some people, like live streams and podcasts, are their primary form of connection. It's better than no connection.
They're able to direct message their virtual girlfriends, and now they have assholes like Nick Fuentes and Tim Pool to hang out.
So why are Nick and Tim assholes? Like, when I was really lonely, when I was going through chronic fatigue syndrome, I had a virtual friendship with Dennis Prager. I'd listen to him on the radio every weekend. I'd called his show about 30 times. And that was the lifeline that I absolutely needed during very dark, lonely, scary times when I was in the grip of something that nobody seemed to understand, when my life had collapsed around me, where I had no strength, where I was spending 20 hours a day in bed, where I could see no path forward. And through my virtual parasocial connection with Dennis Prager, I was able to keep going and find a meaningful, happy, fulfilling life in Judaism, make a lot of friends in the Jewish community, become intellectually, socially, culturally absorbed in the Jewish narrative. So often the parasocial relationship can lead to real relationships, real friendships, right? A lot of people have met from my live streams. They've employed each other, they've invested in each other, they've dated each other. Right? Just because you have parasocial relationships doesn't mean that you don't have the real thing, doesn't mean that the parasocial relationship never leads to the real thing. And I fail to see why listening to a podcast is somehow morally or intellectually inferior to watching TV. This can be a good path forward. This can be a positive addition.
I mean, I think it's just a matter of monetizing parasocial relationships.
Right. Because that is the thing. It's like.
So why should parasocial relationships not be monetized? Like, does monetizing something defame it? Does it dirty it? Right? If you're meeting someone's needs for connection or guidance or wisdom or excitement or friendship or depth or wisdom or laughter or if you're meeting someone's needs, then what's wrong with monetizing it? So we're here in Rosecutters Bay, Sydney, eastern suburbs. I got my cheap Oppo phone. I'm playing some excerpts from Richard Spencer's recent show on influencers.
It's like, 20 years ago, newspapers and magazines were flying high. They were making huge profits, and even magazines.
Newspapers started going into decline in the 1950s, and this decline accelerated dramatically in the 1990s, but really accelerated after about 2002. So newspapers as a business were only held together by the artificial mechanism of classified ads, right? It was the classified ads that primarily paid for newspapers and journalism. Journalism has rarely paid for itself.
Things like GQ or Vogue or whatever. Every summer they would put out a double issue. It was probably like 500 pages or something, and it was like 2/3 advertisements, full page advertisements. Remarkable, and they were making profit, hand over fist. And so
So what are the big news outlets in Australia? So Rupert Murdoch owns about 2/3, about 70% of newspapers. Then there are 3 major networks, Channel 7, Channel 9, Channel 10. And now they're increasing streaming services, so I'm able to get all my sporting needs met here by KO Sports. It's this online streaming service, $25 a month. I can watch the NFL, I can watch baseball, basketball, etc. So Rupert Murdoch influences disproportionate influence on the news media in particular over here. And then Channel 9 was long the major TV network until it got slashed at the beginning of the aughts. After about 2002, Channel 9 got slashed to the bone. Channel 10 was always the third place TV network. So Channel 9 was the TV network aimed at, the power players. It was number one. It was, secretaries had big tits and wore high heels, and its executives drove, expensive cars, and they had luscious offices. And when there'd be an advertising break during a Sunday night movie of the week, like the sewage department would be able to tell that everyone was going to the bathroom and flushing. Right, so that's how dominant Channel 9 was. Well, Channel 7 was kind of aimed at a suburban audience. It was more bogan. It was more talking to each other with nicknames. A bunch of blokes around at Barbie. And then Channel 10. What audience is Channel 10 aimed at? Is that aimed at the audience stuff? So 7 has become the number one network as far as I know in the past 15 years. So they've been very successful at the suburban audience. So Channel 7, like, they will encourage their guests to come on the morning show and call the host by their nicknames. Right, but what's the audience for Channel 10? They used to run just a bunch of cheap reruns. Now, in the early 1990s, all the 3 Australian networks were bought. So the Lowy family, who owned shopping centers, what was the name of their shopping center? And also, I think Frank Lowy, the patriarch, he tried to secure the World Cup for Australia. Right, spent $40 million, but they weren't able to secure it. Went to Qatar. Thinking about the major shopping centers that the Lowy family owned, mainly in California and Australia. Anyway, the Lowy family bought Channel 10, and they spent big, buying Westfield. Yeah, Lowy family owns Westfield. So in the early 90s, they bought, I think, Channel 10, and then there was a new owner for Channel 9, and then there was this scam artist who bought Channel 7, and they all went bankrupt within a year or two. They dramatically increased how much money they were paying for American TV programming, because Australia is a nation of 25 million. It can't afford to fund all its own TV programming, so they have to buy most of their TV programming from America. And so when you got new owners, they went to America and they just paid exorbitant prices, and so they all went they all went broke and busted, and they had to sell out. Yeah, that was my pet dingo, man. That dingo took my baby. So I like the ABC. So the ABC probably aims at an average IQ of about 110. So it's the national broadcaster. It's like the equivalent of PBS, but more lavishly funded. So I've been watching the Australian TV comedy Fisk, which is about a woman in her 50s who gets hired at a probate law firm. SBS, yeah, a lot of good stuff on SBS. That's the multicultural broadcaster. So, but they have ads. So I really like ABC. There's no advertising. SBS is just a small amount of advertising. ABC is run by leftists. Well, it's run by elite. Yeah, it does lean left, but it's much more intelligent than the commercial networks, which dole out the prol feed, right? The Australian commercial networks probably aim at an average IQ of about 95. Well, I feel like the average American TV network aims at an average IQ of 98 to 100. SBS used to air raunchy European movies at night. So even the public broadcasters, they still need to command an audience. But I think there's a lot of good stuff on the ABC. I'm trying to think of, they did a good dramatic series on the fires in Victoria. And they just did a series I watched about a girl gets out of prison after serving 10 years for manslaughter. Good looking Sheila. Goes back to her hometown where she's not too welcome. So I check out what's on the ABC, and then I go to IMDb to see what its ratings are. They did a good series, Newsreader, about a TV station, I think, in Sydney, and the various newsreaders at the station. 10 years for manslaughter in this country? Yeah, well, I told you it's a fictional show on the ABC, right? So I think the average murder in the United States prior to the 1980s only served about 6 years. It's only once Republicans got into power, massively upped incarceration, that we managed to get a handle on the crime rate. Okay, so why do people get so depressed about the success of talentless hacks, right? It's a lot easier to gain a large audience if you're aiming for an average IQ of 95.
Now, at the turn of the century, they were making huge profits during 9/11. Everyone was reading all this stuff. Then the internet broke through, and all of these local papers went under. The big boys kind of had enough institutional weight.
But the newspapers went under because they had an artificial business model, right? Their business model wasn't journalism. It was that they had the monopoly on classified ads. As soon as they lost that monopoly, they could no longer fund journalism. All right? So journalism is rarely paid for itself. The internet introduced more reality into the journalism business.
To continue, but they have found a way to monetize.
Underbelly was a great TV series. I watched the first season twice. I've watched every episode of Underbelly. SEPO is short for septic tank, which is short for American. Oh yeah, another big difference between British, Australian, and American TV is that in American TV, when someone does something bad, like do drugs or have irresponsible sex, they always get punished, usually in the same episode. But in British and Australian TV, they may not get punished at all, or it may not even happen that same season. So American TV is much more moralistic. Someone does something bad, they have to get punished right away in that episode. So American TV and movies much more optimistic, many more happy endings. So British and Australian shows have more of a fatalistic understanding of life.
Monetize through subscriptions and things like that. But like whenever I go to a local news article and they're like, do you want to read this article for $7.99, or do you want to sign up for like $1.99 per month to read this paper? I'm just like, no.
Fuck no.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, and so they're able, like, how is that going to get monetized? Porn is another thing. Like through, not even before Pornhub, like you could just kind of find free porn through various means. And so it was like, who's paying for this?
Well, people want connection, right? People want connection with their favorite actresses, with their favorite pundits, with their favorite journalists, with their favorite rabbis. All right, so just getting free stuff on the internet doesn't always cut it.
And yeah, but then like OnlyFans was able to remonetize it, and in the same way, like people talking about the news to you, that is also a way to monetize it. Yeah, it's remarkable.
A way of monetizing trust, essentially, and trust is
right. Yes, I mean, look, it's kind of what we're doing here. Let's also be brutally honest. But I'm just going to tell you, I'm not going to like, you guys can tell me to go in some direction. You're going to have to make a compelling argument. Like I am who I am. And yeah, I'm not going to play to you guys or whatever. And, you can like it or dislike it. It's up to you.
I like to think it's more like a school.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was saying I like to think this is more like a school. But on the topic of people like Tim Pool, a lot of dissident material has long been called intellectual pornography, sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly. A lot of the so-called intellectual porn is actually factual and, kept out of the mainstream. But I think that epithet really applies to people like Fuentes, but also people, especially people who are allowed in the mainstream, like Tim Pool, like, I don't know, Steven Crowder, Joe Rogan, etc.
Yes.
Because all they do is provide a certain emotion, which is kind of free-floating ressentiment, where you're never challenged,
Right, so it's lowbrow, hard-on fuel. So like pornography delivers an immediate hit, and so when you call this stuff political pornography, right, you're just saying that it's feeding into these resentments, to these easily accessed emotions that people don't have to work for it. So with pornography, people don't have to work for, understanding the narrative arc.
Never have to assimilate new information. I mean, what this gives us is the hilarious irony that the Trump cult hates Trump's greatest achievement, which is the vaccine from Operation Warp Speed.
Yes.
So, like, if you watch Tim Pool, and it will never be consistent because he doesn't have a worldview.
So, John Smith, you live in Australia. You thought you were blocked. Now I can see all your comments. So, how do you like living in Australia? Like, have you lived overseas? Do you value living in a high-trust, highly cohesive society where most people feel like the government, for all its flaws, is on their side?
You watch Tim Pool just to say, no, that's bullshit, man, for like every single thing that happens.
Yes. I see that actually even further than that. I mean, I noticed that with like the Crystal Ball and Jetty. Like, I don't watch them a lot. I remember watching them quite a bit during 2020. Hold on one moment here.
Come on, Richard, I'm trying to do a show.
We sort of present them as some expert like Joe Rogan. It's sort of weird though, because he'll have on Tulsi Gabbard. They don't have on like Peter, buy my gold shekel Schiff. It's like, dude, what direction are you going in, man? Like,
well, also to go back to this, the idea of free floating resentment. So much of it is like meta criticism. So what I was talking about with Crystal and Sagar and Jetty, look, are they the worst? No, they're not the worst. And sometimes they'll have some pretty good takes and whatever. I don't want to really totally throw them under the bus, but it just seems like the entirety of like, what are they actually saying? What is your actual take? It is that cable news just isn't doing their job, or like people don't trust the mainstream media. They're not telling, and it's like that's such a, it's like a neutral, like just kind of meaningless like thesis, like it's like, I don't know, it's like individualism or democracy. It's like an empty ideal, like the question isn't democracy, but like, what are you voting for? Or are you an individual? Okay. Like, what does that mean? You're a pedophile or you are a poet. There's a big difference. Both of those are individualist, at some level. So, it's just this kind of like, again, free-floating resentment is probably the best way to describe it. It's just, we hate the institutions. They're not getting it right. What do you actually say? I mean, the irony of like Sagar and Jetty and Crystal Ball is that like the value that I get from them is when they're kind of like giving me a pretty like mainstream accurate assessment of a world. It's like when they act like the news, but it's just a little more friendly and accessible. That's like when I gain value from them. And when they kind of go deep into what they're all about, I'm just like, pass.
And they don't provide any concrete solutions to anything. It's just it's like resentment porn is what it is.
Yeah.
If you listen to Stephen Brown, he's like the stifler of politics. Like he has that same attitude, and everything is here's my slightly edgy, but I'm actually here for the lol libertarian take and how wokeness will eventually fall because we're going to go back to a small government and a gold standard, and that's the way we're going to do it always. Like that is basically his bit in amongst the comedy routine.
Yeah, those guys boil it down to homo economicus.
Look, we can only handle so much dissonance in our life, right? We all need comfort. And if your life is chaotic, then you're going to have much more of a need for, pre-masticated punditry, right? If you're having a hard time with life, right, you're going to need comfort wherever you can get it. And so I think that's what's going on with many people when it comes to their entertainment choices. Luke's sunglasses, we are not allowed to look in his eyes. But I think like the more at ease you are with yourself, like the more bonded you are to other people, because you're at ease with yourself, other people sense your ease, therefore they feel relaxed with you, therefore they can open up to you, you open up to other people, right? If you're functional, if you're navigating your way through life effectively, you have less need for external comfort such as punditry that only fits with your prejudices, right? You're more prepared to struggle in your choices of movies, TV shows, podcasts, books, right? But if your life is a mess, if you're filled with fear, anxiety, rage, depression, sadness, then you can have much more of a need for comfort from your pundits and from your books and from your magazines and from your podcasts, right? If you haven't achieved the inner peace, then you'll try to mainline it artificially. And you won't be able to handle, a contrary perspective.
It's like everything boils down to economics on the micro level, even in some capacity. It's sort of astounding, quite frankly.
Or it's kind of like we would get rid of the left as a social and political phenomenon if we just got rid of public schools. Like that is simplifying it by much.
We're all in homeschool.
Yeah.
Who knows? Yeah, it is. It is pretty meaningless. At the end of the day, it is that power of that personality.
I don't understand how he's not repulsed by Candace Owens' personality like I am. Like, politics aside, just listening to her talk, she is so unlikable to me. But no one else seems to see that.
Well, I think everyone sees that. I mean, it's just the power for a certain segment of the audience. A black woman reiterating their talking points is just, that you might as well be showing them porn. Right, it's have a huge part on it.
Okay, so there's something Freudian happening there that we dare not speculate on.
Yeah.
Everything.
I don't know of a braver pundit in America today than Candace Owens. I mean, I think she's incredibly brave. Luke leaves the US before the big vote. Australia is his bug out boogaloo spot. So there was a big COVID outbreak in Los Angeles right after I left. But a lot of people trash Candace Owens. I think she's incredibly brave. She provides a lot of value as a pundit. I'd put her in my top 5 of pundits along with Ann Coulter and Tucker Carlson, Mickey Kaus.
Also, it's interesting. I notice this whenever I'll see her. She straightened her hair and she kind of is giving off a very strong white vibe. And I doubt she was doing that like 5 years ago.
No, I think that's the way she talks. Like, this is what I hear every time she talks. It's standard trite cliches of conservatism, and it's in this voice. Like, the left can't stop losing.
Yeah, exactly. It is really annoying. But also, I saw this on, again, I do kind of cursory research, but I think I don't want to spend too much time among conservatives. But I remember when I was like looking into John Doyle, and I actually did listen to his entire thing on Russia, which he said 3 things for an hour and a half over and over again. But he was interviewed by Candace Owens, like he was on, and all they were doing was reacting to libs of TikTok videos. So they just had them on, and they were showing these, crazy kindergarten teachers talking about.
Okay, so they're appealing to a 100 IQ audience. What do I think about Colin Liddell's insinuation that Richard Spencer's the Fed? I don't agree with it. But it is interesting that Michael Edison Hayden, the gay Southern Poverty Law Center journalist and attack dog researcher, how protective he is of Richard Spencer. That's kind of weird, and implying that he knows things that other people don't know and that everyone should just lay off Richard Spencer It's kind of weird that a Antifa lefty journalist like Michael Edison Hayden of the Southern Poverty Law Center is so protective of Richard Spencer.
About gender and stuff like that. And like, I just can't believe this. Like, wow, get help, please. It's like, okay. You know,
that's a huge part of it now. Is Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, they're doing reaction videos like they're...
Matt Walsh is really funny, really smart, really talented, man. He's very clever, very funny.
I know, 20-year-old virgin.
yes.
And it's
Yes.
exactly what you just said, Richard. But yeah, all these retards are just lapping it up.
Yeah.
Well, why are these pundits like doing these like cringy things? Because they're trying to make a living. It's not easy making a living from punditry. Like, journalism is rarely paid for itself. Punditry is rarely paid for itself. National Review, New Republic, never been financially sustainable, financially independent. They've always required subsidies. So people who want to make a living have to give an audience what it wants to hear. Right? Those are just part of the challenges of being in business.
And it's very similar because I imagine that was, at least in my experience, that was coming from people doing entertainment journalism. You know, like, you know, this huge genre is reacting to trailers. And, you know, oh, like...
Look, if journalism has never paid for itself, then you have to move outside of journalism if you want to get the funding to do journalism, right? If you want to get the funding to do journalism, you have to break the mold of journalism, step outside of journalism, and try to do things that are popular, that will get funding, that will then enable you to do the things you really want to do.
Like, the new Rise of Skywalker trailer just drops. Like, let me show you the Easter eggs or whatever. And then certainly, like, reviewing movies in this kind of reaction way. And it's kind of funny how that whole genre has kind of, like, moved into politics, where, yeah, Matt Walsh, like, that's what he does. He has a... Yeah, Matt Walsh probably does have a basic worldview. That's kind of Protestant, very Goldwater Protestantism. But, you know, there's not a whole lot there. But it's basically just like...
I think Matt Walsh is highly intelligent, very skilled, very funny. I think he's at absolute top of his game. Thumbs up to Matt Walsh.
This young man, his name is Barry Nelson. He is a man, born one, and he is now pretending to be a woman. And he is doing makeup tutorials on YouTube. And this is what he has to say. And he apparently thinks chromosomes don't exist. Well, that's new to us. Do you think you could define what a woman is? I'm not sure. You know, they just, you know, I could do this honestly.
Look, Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro, Candace Owens, and Nick Fuentes, and Tim Pool, they all have to make their living. They all try to make their living from their online efforts. Therefore, they have to pander to a lower IQ audience than Richard Spencer does, who's independently wealthy. Right? When you're independently wealthy, when you have independent financial support, when you don't depend upon maximizing your audience size, then you can afford to be more highbrow, to be more intellectually responsible. Right? It's a lot easier to do the right thing when you've got money in the bank. Right? When you're responsible for, say, the employment of dozens of people, which is the case with Ben Shapiro and other people at the Daily Wire, then you have to take that into consideration and do things that attract a large audience to keep that money flowing in. So you can't judge them by the same standards that you apply to yourself. But I noticed Richard doing something that I have long done, is I always try to look at people through varying perspectives and like try to think, oh, through this angle I'm superior to this person. You know, through this angle I'm braver than this person. You know, from this angle I'm deeper than this person. You know, from this angle I have more clarity than this person. You know, from this angle, you know, I'm telling tougher truths than this person's willing to say. Right? I think this is a universal human compulsion to favorably compare ourselves to others, and I think that I probably had it, you know, much more intensely than the average person. Howard Stern in the 2010s went full into professional interviews. Yeah, I haven't heard much positive about Howard Stern in about 20 years. Seems to have lost his edge. Bye-bye.